Chapter 12. Buddy! He spun around, startled by her cry. Hi. She saw that his hair was wet and very curly. He must have just washed it. He was wearing a sleeveless blue t-shirt and very Hawaiian-looking baggy trunks. What are you doing here? She asked, feeling very relieved, but remembering how angry she was at him. Your mom let me in. Then she had to go shopping. How are you? Okay. I came to apologize. Really? She sat down on the back of the leather couch and crossed her arms. You really don't have to? No, I want to. I'm sorry, that's all. He took a few steps toward her. Buddy, you still don't believe me about Paul, she said, tugging at the silver pendant on her neck. Lissa, please, let's not start up with that. But if you don't believe me, if you just think I'm crazy... I don't think you're crazy, he protested, shoving his hands into the pockets of his trunks. Listen, I had an idea. Let's just go out tonight and have some fun. What do you say? She looked at him doubtfully. Fun? Yeah, I'll pick you up about 8 and we'll go to Red Heat. Well, come on, Lissa, you've always wanted to go there. Melissa smiled and uncrossed her arms. Buddy really was trying to be nice. He hated loud, crowded dance clubs. He'd always refused to take her to Red Heat in the past. Now here he was suggesting it. Okay, great, she said. She walked over to him, leaned forward, and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek. You're forgiven. He grinned back at her. That was easy. Well, what would you have done if I'd asked you out for dinner, too? Don't look at me like that, she replied. I'm not that kind of girl. Before it had become a teen dance club, Red Heat had been a farm equipment warehouse. From the outside, the long, tall building still looked like a warehouse, but all thoughts of farm machinery vanished as soon as they stepped into the hangar-sized dance floor. The concrete floor, nearly a city block long, had been covered with long strips of 50-color linoleum, pinks and blacks, orange squares on pale green, aqua and maroon, all unmatched, all clashing. When the long rows of colored flashing lights struck the dance floor from above, the floor seemed to come to life, seemed to dance right along with the dancers above it, and the warehouse became a different world. The walls had all been painted red, although it was seldom bright enough to see their true color. The rafters above had also been painted red. The long juice bar and all the other furnishings were red, in keeping with the name Red Heat. Giant black speakers, mounted at regular intervals from the rafters, blasted the music down to the floor, which reverberated from the booming sound and echoed the music right back up beyond the rafters, trapping the dancers in the middle, encircling them with the music, holding them as if in a powerful spell. I guess they call it Red Heat because it's 800 degrees in here, Buddy shouted, perspiration dripping off his forehead. What? Melissa, holding onto his shoulders, leaned closer to hear what he was saying over the roar of the music. They had been dancing for nearly an hour. Melissa, wearing a sparkly midriff-length top and black spandex bicycle shorts under a thigh-length purple skirt, felt great, dizzy and exhausted, as if she were moving in a fast-flowing stream, a stream of lights and sound and people. It felt so good not to think about anything, just to move mindlessly, almost machine-like, to the music. She hadn't thought about the ghost once. Paul. Where was he, anyway? She had called to him in her room after dinner, but he hadn't replied, and there was no sign of him, no cold wind, no hushed whisper, no shifting shadows across the carpet. I haven't seen the ghost all day, she told Buddy, thinking about her morning in the library. What? He pulled her off the dance floor toward the red neon-lit juice bar against the far wall. I've got to get something to drink. Me too, a Coke or something. They were both breathing hard. She followed closely behind Buddy, the music pounding on all sides. Red and green lights played against their faces, making them look unreal, like Halloween characters. What did you say? Buddy asked, still shouting to be heard. Just a Coke or something. She wiped her forehead with a tissue from the small bag belted around her waist. No, before that. The line at the juice bar was long and moving slowly. I said I hadn't seen Paul all day. I thought we weren't going to talk about that, Buddy said sharply. I didn't. She grabbed his arm. Listen, Buddy, it's hard not to think about him. He's threatened to kill me. What? You heard me. I told you the whole story. He thinks I killed him, and unless I find out who really did it, he's going to... Melissa! He shouted her name angrily and threw up his hands. Stop, please. She let go of his arm. I can't stop. I can't stop because it's real. It's happening to me, Buddy, and I can't stop thinking about it. You're just going to have to believe me, and... He pulled out of line, his face red, then green, then red again, looking very upset. No, stop. I can't believe it. I just can't. You're going to spoil the whole night, Lissa. No, I'm not, she screamed. You already have. She turned and started to run, bumping into a surprised couple. Hey, watch where you're going. But she was already past them, making her way quickly across the endless, crowded dance floor, bumping into couples who didn't seem to notice, surrounded by the throbbing music, her heart pounding along with it, running through the flashing colors. At the end of the dance floor, she turned back to see if Buddy was following her. She felt angry, disappointed, and relieved when she couldn't see him. "Hey, miss, if you're coming back in, get your hand stamped," the purple-haired young man called to her in a high-pitched voice. Melissa ignored him, pushed hard against a heavy glass door, and escaped into the night. It was a warm night, but the air felt cold against her skin. Breathing noisily, she bolted down the 3 concrete stairs and kept running across the gravel walk toward the parking lot. Where was she going? She didn't know. She didn't even think about it. She was so angry, so hurt. Buddy just wanted her to be cheerful and happy and pretend everything was okay. He wasn't the least bit interested in her problems, in her very real problem. Buddy really thought she was crazy. Crazy! As long as she kept it to herself, he was happy. He didn't care. He didn't care what happened to her, as long as she shut up about it. Well, how could she shut up about it? She stumbled on the gravel, her sneakers sliding hard, but managed to catch her balance before falling. Where was she? Without realizing it, she had run halfway across the vast parking lot. She was surrounded by rows of cars. Pale white spotlights on the top poles that circled the lot provided the only light. Car shadows lay unmoving at her feet like dark, sleeping animals. She turned back toward the club. She hadn't realized she had run so far. The sound of laughter made her turn around. Some boys were sitting on car hoods at the dark edge of the lot. There were 4 or 5 of them, some long-haired, some with spiky flat tops, wearing blue denim jeans and black leather or denim jackets. They were leaning back on the car hoods, laughing, joking around, tilting their heads back to suck down beers and cans wrapped in brown paper bags. Their laughter was loud and cruel. They had obviously been drinking for quite a while. I'll just turn around, Melissa thought. I'll head back toward the club. I don't think they've even noticed me yet. She took 2 steps back, trying to hide in the shadows of the cars. One of them called to her. "Hey, how you doing?" He raised his brown paper bag in a salute and grinned. "Don't go," another one yelled. "Join the party." Melissa shook her head and started to back away. 2 of the boys, both sitting on the low hood of a yellow Camaro, got into a playful shoving match. "You ask her," one of them said. "No, you ask her." The one on the left gave his friend a hard shove, and the laughing boy, his beer can flying up in the air, toppled off the car and rolled across the gravel to Melissa's feet. "Hey, Fox," he started. Uncertain of what to do, Melissa looked down at his grinning face, and then her mouth dropped open in surprise. Even in the dim, gray light in this darkest part of the parking lot, she recognized him at once. "Paul, what are you doing here?" she asked. Chapter 13. He stared up at her. He didn't make any attempt to get up from the gravel. The wide, foolish grin seemed to be plastered to his face. "Hey, do I know you?" he asked. His friends laughed as if he had just cracked a very clever joke. "Paul," she started, her heart pounding, her throat suddenly dry. "That's my name. Don't wear it out." Again, laughter and knee-slapping from his friends. One of them walked over, a similar foolish grin on his face, bent down, and with great effort pulled Paul to his feet. The 2 of them stood unsteadily, staring at Melissa, looking her up and down. Melissa was so startled to see Paul there in that dark parking lot with his loud, drunken friends that she forgot her fear. You can see him?" she asked the boy who had pulled Paul to his feet. They all laughed again. Looking beyond Paul, she saw that they had all climbed down from the car hoods and were approaching her slowly, sipping from their brown paper bags as they walked. "You really can see him?" Melissa repeated. "Not if I see him first," Paul cracked, and dropped back down to his knees, laughing. It was obvious that he had too much to drink. "But you're real," Melissa stammered. This got a big reaction from all of them. They hooted and howled. Turning quickly, Melissa saw that they had formed a circle around her. "I'm trapped," she thought, feeling a rush of panic. "They're closing in on me." "Yeah, I'm real," Paul said quietly, turning serious. "Want me to prove it?" He grabbed her arm. "Let go of me," Melissa shouted, forcing herself to sound more angry than afraid. To her surprise, he quickly let go. "Hey, you were coming on to me, weren't you?" he said accusingly. "No, I wasn't," Melissa protested, trying to figure out how to get away from these boys and get back to Buddy inside the club. Why hadn't Buddy come looking for her? Didn't he care at all? "You're just a tease, huh?" Paul said, sneering. "Paul, why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why are you acting so different?" He glared at her. "Huh? Yeah, Paul, why are you acting so different? One of Paul's friends, a boy with straight black hair down to his collar, mimicked Melissa. The boy stepped forward and grabbed Melissa's shoulder. What do you see in him anyway? Hey, leave her alone, Paul said, his face suddenly turning ugly. He gave his friend a hard shove. The boy fell back against a new Oldsmobile. She wants me, not you, Paul said. The boy got up quickly. Oh yeah? How about we let her decide, okay? She's already decided, Paul said, his hands curling into tight fists at his sides. His friend glared back at him, trying to decide whether to fight Paul or not. Stop it! Just stop it! Melissa shouted, frightened and confused. How come his friends could see Paul so clearly? Was it possible that he wasn't a ghost after all? That he had somehow managed to trick her back in her room? Let me go, she shouted and turned toward the club. Paul laughed. What's your hurry? Didn't you come out to play? She ignored him and took a few steps, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. Two of Paul's friends moved to block her path. She moved quickly to the right. They moved to the right. She started to the left. Grinning at each other, they moved left to block her once again. What's the matter? Paul called after her. You too good for us. I want to go now, Melissa said slowly, determinedly, pronouncing each word distinctly. She didn't want them to know how frightened she was. Her knees were shaking and her voice had a slight quiver. Let her go, the boy Paul had shoved said quietly. Don't tell me what to do, Paul screamed, turning on his friend. Don't ever tell me what to do. I just said let her go, the boy replied, standing his ground. I'll let her go when I'm finished with her, Paul said, his voice turning low and threatening. And without any further warning, he lunged at his friend, grabbing his shoulders, and the two of them fell to the gravel, rolling around, wrestling hard and furiously, screaming and cursing at each other as the others gleefully looked on. Melissa hesitated for only a second, then began running back across the parking lot toward the club. She had gone only a few steps when they realized she was escaping. Hey, come back here. She recognized Paul's angry voice and kept running. The rows of cars on both sides of her seemed endless. The gravel flew from under her sneakers. She heard them coming after her, tried to pick up speed, slipping and sliding, and nearly lost her balance. The lights were out on that section of the parking lot, and the sudden darkness frightened her even more. They're catching up, she realized. What are they going to do to me? Hey, Blondie, we just want to have some fun, one of them yelled. The others laughed and kept chasing her. Several couples were watching them in the parking lot. Because of all the laughter, they must have thought it was all a joke. The double glass door entrance to the club came into view. Melissa gasped for breath. Her head throbbed and her chest felt as if it were about to explode. Would she be safe inside the club? Yes, they wouldn't follow her in there. Hey, Blondie, we won't hurt you. Honest. Why did Paul act so weird, so cold, so horrible? She had spent most of the day trying to help him, trying to find out what really happened to him. Now here he was, acting so gross, like a complete animal, as if he didn't know her at all. Was he just showing off for his buddies? Two couples came out of the club and stood in front of the entrance, talking and giggling. Help! Melissa tried to call to them, but her cry was strangled in her throat. She was too out of breath to make a sound. Help me, please! She tried again, and again the words came out weak, a soundless groan. The two couples laughed among themselves and didn't turn around. She stepped into the glare from the flashing red spotlight, the light pulsating on and off as quickly as her heartbeat. I'm almost there, she thought, and turning back, she saw that Paul and his friends were no longer chasing her. In fact, they were gone. Shadows slid through the long aisle of cars. Was that them? Were they running off? Were they hiding out there, waiting for her to return? When did they stop chasing her? And where did they go? She held her hand over her eyes, trying to keep out the blinding, flashing red light. The club doors opened and music burst out into the silence, startling her. The doors shut. The parking lot fell silent once again. Still shielding her eyes, Melissa stared out at the rows of cars. Where did Paul and his friends go? How did they disappear so quickly? Were they all ghosts? Hey, Melissa! Lost in her thoughts, still trying to calm her pounding heart, she didn't hear the voice. Melissa! A hand touched her shoulder. No! She screamed and backed away. What's wrong? Buddy asked, looking surprised and concerned, flashing red, then black, then red again under the spotlight. Buddy, please take me home, she said. She grabbed his arm. He felt so solid, so real. I couldn't find you, he said. I didn't know you were outside. I'm sorry, she started. She heard a noise, a scuffling sound, somewhere down the nearest row of cars. Was that Paul and his friends? Buddy followed her gaze. Melissa, what is it? I thought I saw something. I don't see anything. It's so dark down there. Some of the lights are out. She held on to him tightly. They were both flashing red, then black, as if they were materializing and then disappearing like ghosts. You want to go home? Yes, thanks. Melissa, you're shaking all over. I'm just tired, I guess. She wasn't going to tell him that she saw Paul in the parking lot. Paul and his real friends. She knew if she told Buddy, they'd just start to argue again. He'd get that worried look on his face and say they should tell her parents immediately. She couldn't tell him. She knew she couldn't. It would just make him more certain that she was losing it, cracking up. Then her parents would get into the act, and her life would get even more complicated than it already was. Sorry I'm such a downer, she said. Please take me home. He put his arm around her shoulders and led her to the car. Melissa walked quickly, alert to any sound or sign that Paul and his friends were there, hiding, watching, waiting. They had disappeared into thin air. She slid into the passenger seat and closed her eyes. Even with her eyelids shut tight, the flashing red light didn't go away. Buddy talked excitedly about what a great club Red Heat was, and what a great sound system they had, and how they should go there more often, but what a shame because the club was so expensive. He had obviously decided to forget the fact that they had had an argument, and that Melissa had stormed out of the club. Melissa had to struggle to remember what the argument had been about. Paul. Of course it was about Paul. Maybe Buddy figured if he ignored the whole thing, Paul would just go away. Melissa wished Buddy was right. If only Paul would go away. An hour later, in bed, Melissa couldn't get to sleep. When she closed her eyes, she saw Paul and his friends, saw them shoving one another against the cars, tilting their heads back to drink from the brown paper bags, saw them circling her, closing in on her. She couldn't get Paul's face out of her mind, his cruel laughter, the way he threatened her, the way he grabbed her so fiercely, the way he looked at her, the way he hated her. Yes, that was what Melissa found so frightening. Paul hated her. She didn't even know him, and he hated her. It was a warm, humid night, but she pulled the covers up to her chin. The bedroom window was closed and locked. The street light down below cast a pale yellow light onto the ceiling. I've never been hated before, Melissa thought. Sure, there had been kids who didn't like her very much, kids she didn't get along with, but she had never been hated so blindly, so heatedly. Never. He really has come back to kill me, she thought. Somehow, she had never taken his threat seriously. She had thought she could reason with him, talk to him, help him. He had seemed jealous of Buddy after all, and because of that, Melissa had even fooled herself into thinking that maybe Paul wasn't so bad after all. But seeing him there on that dark parking lot with his friends, seeing how he fought them, how hard he was, how bitter, how cruel, she realized that she was wrong about him. He would never be her friend. He could kill her. He meant what he said. He hated her that much. She sat up straight when she felt the rush of cold air. A few seconds later, Paul appeared, first a dark outline in front of the window, then a shadowy form moving quickly to the foot of the bed. Melissa couldn't see his face. It was covered in shadow. She saw that he was still wearing the straight-legged blue denim jeans and the faded denim jacket. He started to move closer. Get out of here, she screamed, gripping the covers. Stay away from me. Leave me alone. The ghost seemed to float up until he was looming above her, glowing dark eyes staring coldly down at her. Get out, Melissa repeated, feeling his eyes burn into hers. Just go away. The ghost began to fade. The eyes dimmed. The face darkened. The floating form became a dim outline, shades of gray against the pale light from the street. I'll be back. I'm not finished here, Paul said, words more chilling than the air he left behind. Chapter 14. No, I can't, Della. Not this morning, anyway. Melissa pulled back the curtain and looked out the bedroom window. It was a gray day, heavy, dark clouds covering the sky. She shifted the phone from one ear to the other. Yeah, Buddy and I had a pretty good time last night. She didn't feel like getting into it with Della first thing in the morning. She realized she hadn't confided at all in her best friend. She wanted to tell her about Paul. She needed to. Della would probably believe her, and Melissa desperately needed someone to believe her. I'll tell her about it when my parents are away, when I stay at her house this weekend, Melissa thought. They chatted aimlessly for a few more minutes. Then Melissa promised to call her later, hung up, and went down to breakfast. She found her mother, wearing a maroon running suit at the table, with the morning paper and a half-eaten dry English muffin. Her father, leaning on the kitchen counter, was having a heated telephone discussion with someone about plane reservations. Morning, Mrs. Stine muttered from behind her paper. Who's Daddy talking to? Melissa asked, pouring herself a bowl of cornflakes. Travel agent, her mother said, chewing the dry, toasted muffin. Some problem with our tickets to Las Vegas. He's going in late today. She lowered the paper and stared at Melissa. Look at the rings under your eyes. Melissa put down the milk carton. Mother, that's physically impossible. You can't look at your own eyes. Didn't you sleep? Not too well, Melissa admitted. That sweatshirt is wrinkled, her mother said, folding the newspaper. I know, I'm a slob. Didn't it used to be white? No, Mother, it was always gray. Melissa made a face. I'm not interested in your problems, Mr. Dryden's voice boomed into the phone. You have to get us boarding passes with our tickets. I'm not taking the chance of being bumped from the plane. I know how airlines overbook these days. Poor Daddy, Melissa said with a mouthful of cornflakes. I really think you should change your mind, her mother said. What? You know, come to the convention with us. It'll do you good to get away. You've had such a boring summer. Melissa laughed. Believe me, Mother, it hasn't been boring. Her mother looked disappointed. You won't come? No, really, I don't think so. Melissa pretended to concentrate on her cornflakes. Running away to Las Vegas, she knew, wouldn't help her. She had to find out the truth about Paul, find out what really happened to him. It was the only way she could get rid of him, the only way he would leave her alone. Melissa ate quickly, pushed her chair away from the table, and, waving to her father, headed toward the front door. Where are you off to? Mrs. Dryden called after her. Just meeting Della, Melissa lied. Looks like rain, her mother said. I won't melt. The sky looked a little less threatening as she packed her car down the drive. The clouds had lifted. They looked as if they might blow past without leaving any rain. Melissa turned down the mill road and headed toward town. The dashboard clock read 11:58. How had she slept so late? She turned into the large shop-and-stop parking lot on Division Street and slowly cruised the rows of cars looking for a parking place. Maybe today won't be a total waste of time like yesterday, she thought. Maybe today I'll find some answers about Paul. Melissa had recognized one of the boys with Paul in the parking lot the night before. His name was Frankie. She couldn't remember his last name. She thought he looked familiar, but she didn't remember who he was until it came to her in the middle of the night. He delivered groceries for the shop-and-stop. The parking lot was completely full, so Melissa had to park on the street outside the lot. She climbed out, locked the car, and crossed the lot, walking quickly, starting to feel nervous. Frankie, she had noticed, had hung back the night before. He hadn't threatened her or stood in her way. In fact, he had seemed a little embarrassed by the whole incident. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking on Melissa's part. Anyway, she told herself, talking to him while he's at work is perfectly safe. He's not going to try anything in the middle of the supermarket. Frankie was her only clue now, the only person she knew who could actually tell her about Paul, who maybe could clear everything up for her. I hope he's here today. I hope I can find him. The electric door swung open with a loud buzz, and Melissa stepped into the frigid air of the vast supermarket, with its clattering shopping carts and rhythmic beeping of computerized cash registers. She walked through the produce department, past a tall display of some new kind of cherry soda. She was surprised to see Frankie without having to search for him. He was at the end of the nearest checkout line, bagging groceries for a young woman with a baby and a carrier on her back. Melissa hesitated, wondering what she was going to say to him. Maybe this is a stupid idea, she thought. Frankie looked up, having packed the last of the groceries, and saw her. At first, he seemed confused, as if he didn't remember who she was. Then, suddenly, a broad smile of recognition spread over his face. As Melissa walked up to him, the smile faded, replaced by a wary look. Frankie? She asked uncertainly. Hey, look, I don't want no trouble, he said, waving her away. His straight brown hair was tied behind his head in a short ponytail. He was wearing a long, white shop-and-stop apron over black jeans and a crisp blue work shirt. No, Melissa started. I didn't do nothing last night. The other guys. I didn't think they should have. His voice trailed off. He was looking past Melissa to a large woman behind the counter, probably his supervisor. I didn't come because of last night. I wanted to ask you about something else. He shook his head, straightened a stack of brown grocery bags. It'll only take a minute, I promise, Melissa pleaded. He hesitated. Well, okay, I'll take my break now. He walked over and said something to the woman behind the counter, then motioned for Melissa to follow him. She followed him down the long produce aisle to a large storeroom against the back wall. It was even colder in this room and smelled of rotting fruits and vegetables. Frankie pulled down a long crate and motioned for her to sit down. Melissa lowered herself onto the crate and crossed her legs. He continued to stand. I only get 10 minutes for my break, he said, waving to two guys unloading lettuce from big crates into a shopping cart. I want to ask you about Paul, Melissa said, unsure of how to start. Frankie smiled. You really got the hots for Paul, huh? Melissa could feel herself blushing. No, that's not why. I mean, listen, you and Paul were friends? Yeah, we're buddies. Paul's a pretty bad dude. What do you mean by bad? She asked uncomfortably, suddenly feeling very stupid, wishing she hadn't come here. Frankie shrugged. He's just bad, that's all. His face filled with suspicion. Hey, listen, if Paul did something wrong, or something, I don't know anything about it. No, listen, I mean, he's my buddy, but I don't go along with some things. I mean, I don't know anything at all, really. Frankie looked up at the clock above the storeroom door. Melissa realized this wasn't going well at all. She decided she'd better get to the point. When did Paul die? She asked. Frankie's mouth dropped open. He pulled at his ponytail. Huh? Paul, you know, when did he die? Can you tell me? Paul's dead? He sat down on the floor next to Melissa. When? Last night? No, wait, that's impossible. I talked to him on the phone this morning, before work. Now Melissa was completely confused. Maybe we're talking about different Pauls, she said. Yeah, maybe. Frankie still looked very upset. The Paul I'm talking about died some time ago, Melissa said. Frankie got to his feet slowly. Hey, you really scared me. I'm sorry, Melissa stammered, but I wanted to ask you. Frankie looked up at the clock again. Hey, sorry, but I gotta get back to work, and I need a soda first. If I'm late after a break, I'll be busted. He turned and hurried from the storeroom. The swinging doors closed behind him. Melissa sat on a crate for a few minutes, staring at the stack of crates against the wall, trying to make sense of what he had just told her. It didn't make sense. They were talking about the same Paul. That was the only thing Melissa was certain of. But was Paul dead or alive? A living, breathing human or a ghost? She knew that Paul was a ghost. He had told her he was a ghost. He appeared and disappeared like a ghost. So how could Frankie not realize that his buddy was dead? How could he have talked to Paul before going to work? Melissa stood up and walked slowly out of the storeroom, feeling as disappointed as she was confused. Frankie had been her one clue, her one hope, but he had only helped to make things more baffling than ever. As she walked past him to the exit, Frankie looked up from the bag he was packing and gave her a curious look. He thinks I'm crazy, Melissa thought. Maybe I am. Stepping outside the supermarket, she saw that the pavement was wet. It must have rained while she was inside, and now the sky was clearing, sunlight sparkling off the wet cars in the parking lot. She walked around a large puddle and headed for her car. Thinking about Frankie, she didn't see the car backing out of its space until it nearly hit her. Watch where you're going, a woman's voice yelled. Melissa dodged away, shocked to her alertness, and stepped into a puddle, cold water splashing over her sneakers. I've got to pay attention, she thought, making her way down the endless rows of cars to the street. She heard footsteps behind her, but didn't think anything of them. A car trunk slammed shut. A baby was crying back by the supermarket. She heard the footsteps again as she turned a corner and headed down the last row of cars. They sounded closer behind her now. She turned around, just to see who it was, and saw a flash of color as someone ducked behind a car. What's going on? She wondered. Was she seeing things? She turned and started walking again, a little faster. She took several steps, then spun around again. Again, a flash of dark color. A dark blue jacket, maybe. Dark hair. Whoever it was disappeared behind a blue Toyota. Someone's following me, that was her first thought. It looks like Paul, that was her second. But why would Paul hide behind a car? He could appear and disappear. He didn't have to hide. Should she stop and wait him out? No. She could feel the fear creeping up her body, catching at her throat. No. She decided to run. She turned and, ignoring the puddles, began running to the street. He isn't following me, is he? No, he isn't. He can't be. Yes. The footsteps, scraping against the pavement, splashing through the puddles, right behind her now, closer, running faster than she was. What was the point of running? She stopped and turned. Paul! He stepped close and grabbed her shoulder.